In the shadowed annals of history, between the months of May and June in the year 1944, the Nazis unwittingly captured on film some of the most harrowing atrocities ever committed at Auschwitz, a place that would forever symbolize the depths of human depravity. These images revealed the ruthless machinery of Auschwitz II-Birkenau, where mass selections unfolded on the infamous ramps, determining who would live a little longer in torment and who would face immediate death. Endless lines of weary, frightened people snaked their way toward an uncertain fate, often leading straight to the gas chambers, while the personal belongings of the victims, items that once held memories of lives lived, were reduced to mere piles of discarded objects, sorted meticulously by their very executioners. In less than 5 years of operation, the 3 camps that comprised the Auschwitz complex had transformed into an epicenter of unimaginable barbarism, where more than 1.1 million souls perished, including a heartbreaking 200,000 children who were torn from the world far too soon. Women endured forced abortions in the midst of this hell, their bodies violated in ways that stripped them of any remnant of dignity, while children were ruthlessly separated from their families, some dispatched to grueling labor camps where survival was a daily gamble, and others sent directly to the gas chambers without a moment's hesitation. The living conditions within these walls were nothing short of inhumane, with overcrowded barracks infested by rats and vermin that spread disease like wildfire, constant gnawing hunger that weakened bodies to the point of collapse, and forced labor that pushed prisoners beyond the limits of human endurance until they simply gave out. Every single day in this forsaken place brought with it layers of physical and psychological torture, including the soul-crushing agony of witnessing the deaths of loved ones, family members, friends, fellow sufferers, right before one's eyes, a torment that etched permanent scars on the minds of those who somehow managed to survive. Although the Third Reich had established nearly 1,000 concentration camps across its vast territory, none could match the sheer scale of brutality and the staggering number of deaths that occurred at Auschwitz, making it the ultimate death camp of the so-called Aryan race, a monument to hatred and systematic extermination. On the 27th of April in 1940, SS Commander Heinrich Himmler issued the fateful order to establish a concentration camp in the quiet town of Auschwitz in southern Poland, an order that marked the beginning of Auschwitz's dark legacy. At that time, Auschwitz was a small, unassuming town situated about 50 kilometers southwest of Krakow, a place where life moved at a peaceful pace, far removed from the storms of war brewing across Europe. But with Himmler's directive, everything in this serene locale was about to change irrevocably, as the site was chosen to house a new concentration camp that would soon become synonymous with death and suffering on an industrial scale. The camp was designed from the outset to hold thousands of prisoners, and its construction proceeded with alarming speed, transforming the landscape into a fortified prison. Barbed wire fences encircled the perimeter, punctuated by imposing guard towers that loomed like silent sentinels, while brick barracks were erected to accommodate the influx of inmates, structures that offered little more than basic shelter from the elements, but plenty of opportunities for cruelty. By early 1941, Auschwitz had begun receiving its first prisoners, and by March of that year, the camp already held 10,900 individuals, most of whom were of Polish nationality, people who had been rounded up for their perceived threats to the Nazi regime. Yet this initial number was merely a fraction of the total that would eventually pass through its gates as the camp expanded to engulf more lives in its voracious maw. Of the 1.3 million people who were ultimately sent to Auschwitz, a staggering 1.1 million met their end there, victims of a system designed for annihilation. Among these tragic figures were 960,000 Jews, 865,000 of whom were gassed upon their very arrival, never even given the chance to register as prisoners, but instead funneled straight to death. There were also 74,000 non-Jewish Poles who suffered and died, 21,000 Roma gypsies whose nomadic lives were crushed under the weight of Nazi ideology, 15,000 Soviet prisoners of war who endured unimaginable hardships, and up to 15,000 others from various groups, including communist militants, partisans fighting against the occupation, homosexuals deemed unfit by the regime, people with disabilities who were seen as burdens, and those labelled as mentally ill, all swept into the camp's deadly embrace. The prisoners at Auschwitz were subjected to conditions that defied humanity, including relentless starvation that left bodies emaciated and spirits broken, exhaustion from endless toil that sapped every ounce of strength, rampant diseases that tore through the overcrowded spaces, and individual executions carried out with cold precision. Many succumbed to the lack of basic sustenance, their bodies wasting away until they could no longer function, while others perished from the physical toll of labour or the epidemics that flourished in such squalor. Still more were killed in horrific medical experiments, a practice that became one of the darkest hallmarks of the Nazi regime, turning human beings into guinea pigs for pseudo-scientific pursuits that served no purpose but to inflict pain. In the winter of 1941, as the final solution, the Nazis' plan for the systematic genocide of the Jewish people was gaining momentum. The regime sought ever more efficient ways to exterminate Jews on a massive scale, leading to the decision to construct a new camp about 3 kilometers from the original Auschwitz site. This new facility was built on marshy terrain known locally to the Poles as Brzezinka and to the Germans as Birkenau, a name that would soon evoke terror across the continent. Although Auschwitz-Birkenau would ultimately become the site of the largest mass murder of Jews in recorded history, its initial construction was not originally intended for that gruesome purpose. Instead, it was envisioned as a prisoner of war camp during the height of Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's ambitious and ultimately disastrous invasion of the Soviet Union. The task of designing and overseeing the building of this new camp fell to SS Captain Karl Bischoff, who had recently been appointed as the head of the Auschwitz Construction Office, and architect SS Corporal Fritz Ertl, both men who approached their work with the detached efficiency of bureaucrats engineering death. However, from the very beginning, it was evident that the plans they devised were utterly unsuitable for sustaining any form of human life, prioritizing capacity over compassion in ways that guaranteed suffering. Their initial blueprint called for each barrack block to hold 550 prisoners, cramming them into spaces that offered no room for movement or rest, conditions that were deliberately inhumane and designed to break the human spirit. By comparison, at the Dachau concentration camp, a similar block was limited to housing only 200 prisoners, highlighting the extreme overcrowding that would define Birkenau and expose its inmates to unimaginable hardship and degradation. The construction of this second Auschwitz camp, Birkenau, commenced in 1941, with SS officers compelling the inmates themselves to build it, utilizing 10,000 Soviet prisoners who began the grueling work in the autumn of that year. Tragically, only a few hundred of these men survived until the following spring, succumbing to the brutal conditions under which they were forced to labor. Conditions that included starvation, exposure to the elements, and relentless beatings. These prisoners toiled day and night without respite, under the watchful and unforgiving eyes of SS personnel, in an environment that was inherently unhealthy and conducive to the rapid spread of diseases, with the surrounding swamps posing particular dangers as breeding grounds for illness that decimated the workforce. Despite these terrible circumstances, the prisoners somehow managed to complete the construction of Birkenau, which would evolve into the primary extermination center for Jews within the Third Reich, a place where efficiency in killing reached horrifying new heights. Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the SS and a key figure in the Holocaust, was so impressed with the results that he authorized the building of yet another nearby camp to house slaves who would work at the IG Farben factory, further expanding the Auschwitz complex into an impressive yet deadly network of facilities that played a pivotal role in the murderous operations of the Third Reich. While the orders for these expansions emanated directly from Heinrich Himmler, the day-to-day operations and many of the innovations that set Auschwitz apart from other extermination camps originated from the mind of one particularly monstrous individual, a man who implemented the final solution in its most lethal and systematic form, transforming Auschwitz into the most sinister and effective instrument of the Nazi extermination apparatus. This man's name, forever etched in infamy for the suffering and death he orchestrated on behalf of millions, is Rudolf Höss. Rudolf Höss's journey from Dachau to Auschwitz began in April 1940, when this SS officer arrived in the small town in southwestern Poland that the Germans had renamed Auschwitz. His mission was clear: to establish a concentration camp on the site, but upon his arrival, he found only a collection of abandoned buildings and a horse corral, a desolate area with a humid and unpleasant climate that seemed ill-suited for such a grand and grim endeavour. Nevertheless, Höss was resolute in fulfilling his orders, determined to make the camp operational despite the challenges, as questioning directives was not an option for an SS officer like him. Obedience was paramount, and execution of tasks was expected without hesitation. At that moment, no one could have foreseen the horrific fate that awaited the town of Auschwitz, as Höss set about his work with the efficiency of a dedicated functionary, turning the site into a key stronghold for the Nazi regime's campaign of terror. The construction of the camp progressed slowly at first, but Höss was unwavering in his efforts to accelerate the process, recognizing the importance of his role in the broader fight against what the Nazis deemed their enemies. He labored tirelessly, supervising the erection of barracks and the installation of barbed wire fences that would enclose the prisoners in a web of confinement, all while the surrounding town of Auschwitz remained blissfully ignorant of the horrors brewing on its outskirts. Soon, however, everything would change dramatically, as the Auschwitz concentration camp evolved into a bastion of terror and death, and the town itself became a silent witness to atrocities beyond imagination. Rudolf Höss, the camp's commandant, did not present himself as an overtly cruel or ruthless figure. On the contrary, he appeared as an ordinary man, someone you might pass on the street without a second glance, a perception shared by American lawyer Whitney Harris during the Nuremberg trials, where he questioned Höss and found him surprisingly unassuming. Even the inmates at Auschwitz described him as calm and controlled, masking the darkness within behind a facade of normalcy. Yet beneath this harmless exterior lay a past steeped in violence and extremism. Born in the Black Forest in 1900, to a strict Catholic family where obedience was drilled into him from a young age by his father, preparing him for a life of rigid discipline. This upbringing served him well in World War I, where he distinguished himself as one of the youngest non-commissioned officers in the German army, earning accolades for his service. Germany's defeat in that war left Höss with a profound sense of betrayal and disillusionment, feeling abandoned by his government and military leaders, which propelled him toward more radical paths in search of purpose and revenge. He joined the Freikorps, a far-right paramilitary group aimed at countering communist influences along Germany's borders, but his involvement in violent acts led to his imprisonment in 1923 for the murder of his former teacher, Walter Kadow, whom he killed because Kadow had denounced a fellow Freikorps member. Sentenced to 10 years, Höss was released early in 1928, but his experiences only deepened his resentment, which he directed toward what he perceived as an international Jewish conspiracy responsible for his misfortunes and Germany's woes. This twisted mentality drew him into the SS, where he became one of the chief architects of the Holocaust, illustrating how a seemingly normal individual could harbor a heart filled with hate and a mind capable of orchestrating unspeakable atrocities. After his release from prison in 1928, Rudolf Höss attempted to reinvent himself by joining a farming community where he met his future wife and settled into a life of agriculture. But this interlude of relative peace was short-lived. In 1934, Heinrich Himmler, Hitler's chief of police and the head of the SS, personally invited Höss to join the organization as a full-time member, an offer Höss accepted without hesitation, given his long-standing membership in the Nazi Party since 1922 and his prior acquaintance with Himmler. By November 1934, Höss had arrived at Dachau in Bavaria to commence his service as a concentration camp guard, at a time when such camps were primarily sites for temporary confinement and punishment rather than outright extermination. However, Höss would soon find himself immersed in the evolving machinery of Nazi genocide, learning the ropes in an environment that honed his skills for greater horrors. His experience at Dachau was formative, exposing him to a regime notorious for its brutality, with the explicit goal of shattering the will of prisoners through relentless abuse. There, Hoss internalized how to channel the Nazis' visceral hatred toward their enemies into structured systems of control and order, turning abstract ideology into tangible suffering. Life in Dachau was a living hell, where inmates endured all manner of physical and psychological torments, with guards reveling in their power to inflict pain, often murdering prisoners in cold blood or pitting them against one another in deadly confrontations. What made Dachau particularly terrifying, however, was not solely the physical violence but the insidious mental torture, where guards employed psychological manipulations to erode the prisoners' sanity, such as dangling false hopes of release only to crush them, fostering an atmosphere of perpetual despair and doom. Hoss's tenure at Dachau served as a macabre school, equipping him with the tools to become an efficient instrument of death and destruction, skills he would later apply on a grander scale at Auschwitz. Within the camp, prisoners adhered to an extraordinarily strict regime of discipline, mandated to maintain their barracks and clothing in impeccable condition, with even the slightest infraction inviting severe punishment. Regular inspections by SS guards instilled constant terror, as fabricated violations could justify arbitrary brutality, creating a pervasive climate of anxiety where no one felt safe. The capo system, first introduced at Dachau and later proliferated to other camps, further exacerbated this control, appointing certain prisoners to oversee their fellows in work blocks or commands, granting them significant authority but also making them complicit in the oppression. A capo wielded power to ensure efficiency but became a target for resentment, and failure to satisfy SS expectations often resulted in demotion and a likely death sentence among the general population. In 1936, Hoss was promoted to lieutenant and transferred to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, where he continued refining his administrative and guard skills amid Europe's rapidly shifting landscape. By 1939, Germany had invaded Poland, igniting World War II, with the Soviet Union following suit from the east, partitioning the country into occupation zones. In this turbulent context, Hoss was appointed commandant of the new Auschwitz camp in the German zone, tasked with creating a model facility that would exemplify Nazi efficiency for other camps across Europe. Auschwitz was strategically located near Krakow in southern Poland, on grounds previously used as military barracks, with construction commencing in April 1940 under Hoss's immediate supervision, as he oversaw the arrival of the first prisoners. His objective was to forge a concentration camp that was both efficient and lethal, capable of processing thousands while executing the regime's extermination policies with precision. In the ensuing months, Auschwitz morphed into a realm of terror, where inmates endured brutal conditions and slave-like labor, with Hoss as the central administrator whose name became inextricably linked to the camp's cruelty. The onset of terror at Auschwitz crystallized with the establishment of Block 11 in June 1940, when a group of 30 German prisoners arrived from Sachsenhausen to build the camp from the ground up, facing a daunting task without proper tools or materials. These men hauled heavy stones and supplies manually, beaten if they faltered, as the SS demanded rapid progress regardless of the toll. In their desperation to meet deadlines, the Nazis resorted to looting nearby Polish homes, sending prisoners to demolish residences and salvage bricks, boards, and wood for the camp's construction. Meanwhile, the first Polish prisoners began arriving, subjected to forced labor and abuse, with the initial German inmates serving as the first kapos, intermediaries enforcing SS will. As days turned to weeks, Auschwitz took shape, its barracks, wires, and towers rising as symbols of confinement and torment, where inmates labored to exhaustion in a bid for survival. A pivotal shift occurred with the visit of Oswald Pohl, head of the SS main administrative and economic office, who ordered Hoss to expand the camp's capacity, positioning Auschwitz as a cornerstone in the Nazi quest for economic autonomy. The camp's fields would supply raw materials like granite for grandiose projects such as Hitler's Reich Chancellery in Berlin, intertwining forced labor with the regime's architectural ambitions. Block 11 emerged as a dedicated site of terror, a red brick building that, despite its ordinary exterior, housed methods of torture like suspending prisoners from ceiling beams or burning their heads in stoves to extract confessions. Surviving such sessions left inmates with lasting physical and emotional scars, some blinded forever, underscoring the block's role as a microcosm of Nazi brutality. Within Block 11, SS Second Lieutenant Max Grabner held sway over life and death, a former cowherd who had risen through the SS ranks since joining in 1938, becoming one of Auschwitz's most dreaded figures by 1940. Born in 1905 in Vienna to a modest family, Grabner's ascent was swift, and he revelled in his authority, reviewing prisoner records weekly to decree punishments or executions arbitrarily. Condemned inmates were led to an isolated courtyard, shielded by brick walls, where an SS executioner dispatched them with a small caliber shot to the head, a process Grabner oversaw with ruthless detachment. Block 11 stood as a bastion of fear, where the threat of torture and death loomed constantly, embodying the oppressive machinery that defined Auschwitz. Within a mere 2 years, the situation at Auschwitz had deteriorated into a state of utter desperation, transforming the camp into a name that struck dread into the hearts of all who heard it across the Third Reich. By 1942, over half of the initial 20,000 Polish prisoners who had been among the first to arrive had perished, their lives extinguished by starvation, disease, exhaustion, or outright murder. The camp, originally established as a detention facility, had morphed into a sprawling epicenter of terror, where survival was a daily gamble against overwhelming odds. For those who arrived at Auschwitz, the experience was one of immediate horror. Some were funneled directly to the gas chambers upon stepping off the trains, their lives snuffed out before they could even grasp the full extent of their fate. Others were directed to a grim reception center near the camp's iconic gate, where they underwent a dehumanizing process of registration and classification, a prelude to the suffering that awaited them. One of the most distinctive and painful practices at Auschwitz was the tattooing of prisoner numbers, a procedure unique to this camp, and initially applied to Soviet prisoners of war. This agonizing ritual involved piercing the chest with long needles, after which ink was rubbed into the open wounds to create a permanent mark, ensuring easy identification of inmates, even in death. The pain was not merely physical but carried a profound psychological weight, stripping individuals of their names and reducing them to numbers in the Nazi machinery. Each prisoner was issued a striped uniform, a symbol of their subjugation, along with a coloured triangle sewn onto the fabric to denote their category. Jews were marked with a yellow Star of David, a badge of targeted persecution. Criminals received purple or green triangles, the colour reflecting the severity of their supposed crimes. Political prisoners bore red triangles, Roma gypsies brown, homosexuals pink, Jehovah's Witnesses purple, and those deemed asocial were assigned black. This classification system was the first step in a relentless cascade of humiliation designed to erode dignity and foster division among the inmates, setting the stage for the brutal existence that followed. Life within the barracks was a constant struggle for survival. Securing a bed was a daily battle, as spaces were scarce, often becoming available only because their previous occupants had succumbed to the camp's brutal conditions. Many prisoners were forced to sleep on cold stone floors strewn with filthy straw, offering no comfort or respite from the relentless cold and damp. Evening roll calls in the camp's central yard were tense, ritualistic ordeals, where prisoners stood for hours in all weather, their fates hanging in the balance as SS officers decided who would live or die. These moments amplified the pervasive uncertainty, as a glance or a whim could spell doom. Priests and Jews faced particularly vicious treatment, frequently assigned to the penal commando led by Ernst Krankemann, a sadistic capo who had arrived in August 1940 among the second group of German criminals transferred from Sachsenhausen. Though despised by many SS officers for his crude brutality, Krankemann enjoyed the support of key figures like Karl Fritsch, Hoss's deputy, and Gerhard Palitsch, the commander's chief assistant. His reign of terror ended in 1944 when he was imprisoned for stealing inmates' belongings and assaulting a Jewish prisoner, a crime labelled as racial contamination, revealing the corruption that permeated the camp's hierarchy. Krankemann's imposing physical presence made him a terrifying figure. Known for his massive build, he would perch atop the harness of a giant roller used to level the roll call square, a task requiring the strength of 20 prisoners to pull under the lash of his whip. His cruelty was legendary. When one prisoner collapsed from exhaustion, unable to continue, Crankaman ordered the group to drag the roller over their fallen comrade, crushing him in an act of chilling brutality. Such acts were not only tolerated but encouraged by the SS, who rewarded capos like Crankaman with extra soup, larger bread rations, cigarettes, valuable currency in the camp, or better clothing and shoes. These incentives fueled a cycle of terror, as capos wielded their authority to maintain control through fear, ensuring the Nazi system's grip over the prisoners remained unbreakable. The production of Zyklon B became a chilling cornerstone of IG Farben's complicity in Nazi atrocities, as business leaders like Dr. Otto Ambros spearheaded the search for suitable sites for synthetic rubber factories in May 1941. The prolonged war forced a drastic shift in Nazi strategy, as earlier plans to deport Jews to Africa, specifically Madagascar, faded in the face of unforeseen challenges. Winston Churchill's steadfast refusal to surrender and the Royal Air Force's victory in the Battle of Britain disrupted the Nazi expectation of a swift victory, compelling planners to adapt to a drawn-out conflict. Farben, deeply entwined with Nazi leadership, aligned its ambitions with the regime's 4-year plan, redirecting its focus toward eastern expansion. The company selected Silesia, near the Auschwitz camp, for its Buna synthetic rubber plant, drawn by the region's abundant coal, lime, water, and robust transport infrastructure. Initially, the camp's proximity was incidental, as IG Farben aimed to employ incoming ethnic Germans. However, with most able-bodied German workers conscripted to the front lines, labour shortages prompted a sinister pivot: the exploitation of Auschwitz inmates as a ready source of forced labour. This decision transformed Auschwitz from a mere detention facility into a critical hub of the Nazi war production machine, intertwining industrial ambition with human suffering. Heinrich Himmler, the SS chief, seized this opportunity to expand Auschwitz's capacity from 10,000 to 30,000 prisoners, envisioning a vast labour pool to fuel the Reich's needs. Rudolf Höss, the camp's commandant, negotiated a deal with IG Farben. The company would supply materials to build additional barracks, while Auschwitz would provide a steady stream of enslaved workers for the Buna plant. This partnership deepened IG Farben's role beyond labour exploitation, as the company became a key supplier of Zyklon B, the lethal gas used to murder over 1 million people in gas chambers across concentration camps, including Auschwitz, between 1942 and 1945. Originally developed as a pesticide, Zyklon B's deadly efficiency was repurposed for the Nazi genocide, with IG Farben's nearby production facilities ensuring a steady supply. After the war, the company faced justice. In 1947, 9 executives, including Otto Ambros, were imprisoned for war crimes, and IG Farben was dismantled, its assets divided among several German firms, marking a reckoning for its role in the Holocaust. The tragedy of the final solution unfolded as Hitler and Himmler abandoned deportation plans amid the 1941 invasion of the Soviet Union, opting instead for systematic extermination. The mass shooting of Soviet Jews became official policy, but the emotional toll on SS executioners prompted a search for less personal killing methods. Early experiments with explosives proved impractical, and while bottled carbon monoxide had been used in the euthanasia program, transporting it was logistically challenging. Höss, aware of Zyklon B's efficacy against lice, proposed its use for human extermination, sourcing it from IG Farben's nearby facilities. Block 11 at Auschwitz became the testing ground for this gas, marking a horrifying leap in the efficiency of mass murder and cementing Zyklon B's role in the final solution's devastating machinery. The evolution of the gas chambers at Auschwitz marked a horrifying progression in the Nazi regime's methods of mass extermination, transitioning from crude chemical injections to sophisticated systems of industrialized murder. Initially, the Nazis employed chemical injections to kill disabled individuals, but by May 1940, they had shifted to using carbon monoxide in facilities disguised as shower rooms, primarily in converted psychiatric hospitals in West Prussia and Wartherland. These sites became death traps, claiming around 10,000 lives of psychiatric patients, some suffocated in mobile gas vans, hermetically sealed vehicles where victims were packed into compartments and poisoned with bottled carbon monoxide. As part of the Nazis' ethnic cleansing campaign, the homes of these victims were reassigned to ethnic Germans, aligning with the regime's vision of a racially purified territory. This systematic approach to extermination was not only about eliminating those deemed undesirable, but also about reshaping demographics to favor the so-called superior race, a chilling blend of ideology and brutality. The euthanasia program, known as Action 14F13, extended its reach into concentration camps by 1941, targeting prisoners no longer capable of labor. On July 28, 1941, at Auschwitz, approximately 500 sick or disabled inmates were selected during an evening roll call, promised medical care, but instead transported to a converted psychiatric hospital in Sonnenstein near Danzig. There, they were gassed, not because of their ethnicity, but due to their perceived uselessness to the Nazi war machine. The inefficiency of transporting prisoners long distances for execution prompted a shift to on-site killing facilities. Rudolf Höss, Auschwitz's commandant, introduced Zyklon B, a pesticide repurposed for human extermination which allowed guards to avoid the psychological strain of face-to-face killings. Höss viewed this method as a morale booster for his SS team, streamlining the process with chilling efficiency. The first gas chamber at Auschwitz-Birkenau, operational by March 1942, was housed in a brick cottage, dubbed the Little Red House or Bunker 1. Its windows were sealed, rooms divided into two, and signs falsely labelled it a disinfection area to deceive victims. Polish Jews from Silesia were among the first to be gassed there, their bodies buried in nearby meadows. By June 1942, a second facility, Bunker 2 or the Little White House, was converted for similar use. During Heinrich Himmler's visit in July, he observed the gassing of Dutch Jews in Bunker 2 and inspected the nearby IG Farben construction site, expressing approval of the camp's lethal efficiency. Operations in Bunkers 1 and 2 paused in spring 1943 with the construction of larger crematoria, but Bunker 2 was reactivated in May 1944 to murder Hungarian Jews, reflecting the relentless demand for extermination capacity. The Birkenau crematorium, built in October 1941, incorporated advanced ventilation systems, hinting at its dual purpose for cremation and gassing. As the Soviet Red Army approached in January 1945, the Nazis dynamited these facilities in a desperate attempt to erase evidence of their crimes, leaving behind a legacy of horror that would forever define Auschwitz as a symbol of humanity's darkest hour. Josef Mengele's story stands as a chilling embodiment of Auschwitz's cruelty, his arrival coinciding with the completion of Birkenau's crematoria in 1943, marking the camp's peak of destruction. Known as the Angel of Death, Mengele, a doctor with a pre-war reputation as a decorated war hero, transformed into a monster within the camp's confines. His fascination with pseudo-scientific experiments led him to target children, particularly twins, whom he lured with chocolate and false kindness, only to treat them as mere subjects for his gruesome studies. His obsession with twins stemmed from a desire to conduct comparative autopsies, often killing one to dissect both, seeking insights into genetics that served Nazi ideology. He also experimented on dwarves and those afflicted with noma, a disfiguring facial disease, with most subjects dying during his brutal procedures or left permanently scarred. Mengele's actions stripped away any veneer of humanity, his medical training twisted into sadistic torture. After the war, he evaded justice, fleeing to Brazil where he continued secret genetic experiments, living until 1979 without facing trial for his atrocities, a haunting legacy of unpunished evil. On January 27, 1945, the Soviet Red Army reached Auschwitz, discovering approximately 7,000 survivors, described as living skeletons due to their emaciated state from starvation and disease. These prisoners, too weak to be moved, were the last remnants of the camp's horror, left behind as the Nazis forced 65,000 fit inmates on death marches westward through Poland's brutal winter. Clad in thin prison uniforms, these marchers faced temperatures as low as -20 degrees Celsius, with many shot dead while attempting to escape. The Red Army, shocked by the skeletal figures in filthy barracks, feared even touching them might cause harm. Assisted by the Polish Red Cross, Soviet forces provided medical care and food, treating 4,500 survivors in makeshift hospitals. Photographs and films documented the camp's atrocities, preserving evidence of the unimaginable suffering. Most survivors, too frail for transport, received treatment on site, while tens of thousands endured the grueling marches toward camps like Dachau and Flossenburg, where survival remained uncertain. The liberation of Auschwitz on January 27, 1945, now commemorated as International Holocaust Remembrance Day by the United Nations and European Union, ended the immediate torment but left an indelible scar on history. This narrative underscores the Holocaust's horrors, where millions, including Jews, Poles, Roma, and others, suffered under the Nazis' chillingly efficient gas chambers, and Zyklon B. Mengeler's sadism, emblematic of the camp's cruelty, highlights the depths of human depravity when ideology and hatred converge. The liberation marked a turning point, but the annual remembrance serves as a solemn call to promote tolerance and understanding, urging humanity to never forget the catastrophic consequences of unchecked hatred and to strive for a future where such atrocities are never repeated.